First thing you want to do before touching the alternator at all is disconnect the negative battery terminal, because we'll be disconnecting the alternator and it will have a live wire and you don't want to create any sparks or short anything out. So with that nut loose, go ahead and pull this terminal up and set it out of your way where it cannot make contact with the battery terminal. I'm going to pull this fuse box out of the way just so I can get more access underneath. You can unbolt it here if you want, or you can just pull it off the bracket. It's got a little tab here that you press. Set this aside, make sure it doesn't get in your way, because we'll need to get access to these bolts down here, and that's going to release tension off the belt so we can remove this alternator. Now if you look down, you'll see that this is the adjuster. We have to take out this 12mm bolt, and that's going to unlock this one so we can drop the alternator down a little and get the belt off. So again, 12mm socket. These are pretty tight if they've been here tightened for a long time, so a long ratchet with some leverage will be your friend, or wrench, whatever you have. And once you get it broken free, you can switch to something smaller so that you can actually get more swing. Okay, so just back this off a few threads. You don't have to take it out, but you have to back it off because that's going to release the adjuster so we can actually remove the belt. There we go. That's off a little bit, and at this point you can bring your tool here. You'll see this bolt, and you have to unthread this, and that's going to push the alternator down. Okay, the bolt is now loose. Now with a 14mm, let's go up to this bolt here and loosen this up. We'll have to remove it eventually, but for now I just want to loosen this up. And if you look at the alternator, it's starting to drop down, which is perfect. That's what you want. Get this nice and loose so that the alternator can move around. And at this point, with that adjuster loosened up, you can push this down. As you can see, you have more slack on the belt, but clearly we need to go a little more. So let's loosen the adjuster a little bit more. Okay, let's see if we have enough slack on the belt now. Yep. Get the belt off, and you can either take it off completely or just set it down. I'm just going to take it off completely because it just fell off, so might as well. Remove it, inspect it. This is the best time to replace it if needed. AC compressor here, it'll be a little tricky if you need to remove it because it's very close to the firewall, so you have to kind of twist the belt sideways and get it flat up against and then pull it. But take this belt off. This one looks good. If you see a lot of cracks as you fold the belt like this, that's a sign that it needs to be replaced, but this one's actually in perfect condition. So set that aside, and let's continue by removing any wiring that is attached to this alternator. There's this wiring harness here. There's a tab on the side that you have to press away from you towards the alternator. That unlocks this. There you go, set that aside. And now there's going to be a cap over here that is holding the main harness for the alternator, the mounting bolt. That just pops off. There we go, just like that. Don't lose that cap because you'll need it. And with a 10mm, let's remove it. 10mm socket, break this free, remove the nut completely, and then we'll pull the wire off. Okay, set that aside. Now let's disconnect this wire here. Underneath this rubber piece, there's a tab that you need to press in. That'll unlock it, pull it away, and set it aside. And at this point, that should be everything that is attached to this alternator. So let's finish removing the bolts and take this out. At this point, I want to remove this bottom bolt right there that we first loosened up, and you want to remove this all the way. There you go. Nope, it's out of the alternator, but it's still in the adjuster, as you can see. That's fine. I'll get it out and clean it up later. And now you want to move on to the top here, and we'll remove this top bolt completely. Okay, that's unthreaded all the way. Go ahead and pull it out. You might need to move this AC line a little bit. There we go. Take that out. At this point, you can grab the alternator, wiggle it, and it's only held on by just pressure in here. So if you need a pry bar, you can use a pry bar. Watch out where you pry. You don't want to break things, but you basically just want to get this alternator out of this little bracket here. There it is. Okay. Now you want to twist it whichever way is best for you to get it out of here. So let's see. I'm gonna push this up, out like that. Watch out for your wiring. You don't want to rip anything. There we go. There it is. Here's your old alternator. Now, this is optional, but for me, I'm going to do it because this adjuster is pretty rusty and the threads are stuck in there, but I'm going to remove it, clean off the threads on both of these bolts, and then reinstall it. So I'm going to take that one out. That one is not threaded in here. It actually just threads onto the alternator. And to remove this, you actually have to unthread this bolt all the way out of this little block. So I'm going to hold this with some pliers. I put some locking pliers on that little block, and I'm just going to try to remove the bolt from it. So I cleaned these bolts up and put some anti-seize on the threads, maybe a little too much, that's okay. Anyway, put the adjuster back, and when you put this block in that actually holds the bolts for the adjuster, you want to make sure that this hole that is not threaded, this is for the bolt that goes through, is sitting on top. You don't want it like this with it on the bottom. Put this one through and get it ready. And there's a slot right here. That's where it has to go through. That's where it locks into the alternator on this side. So now let's get the new alternator. Let's put the new alternator back down and line it up with this top bracket first. That's where I'm going to attach it to begin with. Put this bigger bolts through. That way it's actually held in place, secure. Press it through all the way, line it up with this bracket on the engine. Make sure the bolt goes through. Thread it on just a few threads, that way you know it's secure and it's not going to fall out and won't let the alternator fall down. And now we have to line up the bolt on the bottom. And this is the tricky part because you can't really see it very well. You want to push it through that slot on the bracket that I showed you earlier. And then you'll feel when it goes into the alternator, because it's going to want to start onto the threads. Now take this bolt on the bottom, and you want to make sure that this block is facing with the unthreaded hole, the not threaded hole down, and then the threaded hole where this adjuster bolt goes in on the top. So put this through, and now you want to line it up with the alternator. This is going to be a little bit tricky. Once it lines up with the threads on the alternator on that bracket, you should feel it fall into place. Sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error. Start it in. I'm going to get it close. I won't tighten it up now. Obviously, this is the last thing that we're going to tighten because this locks in the tensioner, but at least it's in now. So let's get it in a few more threads. All right, I'm just going to stop right there. It still moves up and down. That's perfect. Let's get this top one in a little bit closer. Okay, don't tighten that one either because you need the alternator to still be able to pivot. Now let's reconnect the two wires on the alternator. There was the main power wire right here. So take this little nut off, get your power wire, and make sure that the terminal right here is clean. This one doesn't have any corrosion or anything like that, so it's perfect. Put it right on and we'll tighten it up. But if yours does have corrosion, you definitely want to sand that off, otherwise it won't make a good connection and your alternator will not charge properly. Snug it up. Don't go too tight on this. This has a brass stud that goes inside and you can easily break it. So once it bottoms out and you know it's tight, just leave it right there. Perfect. And then there was this little cap that goes over to protect it from water and debris. Just like that. And let's plug in the electrical connector right over here. Make sure it clicks, that's secure. And now we can get the belt on. Let's put the belt back down. Of course, if you didn't remove it all the way, you would have it still installed. And just like removal, the trickiest part is going to be getting it past the AC compressor here. There we go. Now that that's passed there, let's put it on the harmonic balancer or the crank pulley. And of course, make sure it's on all the way. There, almost. It's off the AC compressor, that's why it's not sitting straight. So let's put it on there. I'm going to loosen up on this tensioner a little bit so I can get more slack out of the belt. When I put it back, I must have tightened it a little too much. There we go. Right there should be good. Now this gives me plenty of slack to put the belt on, perfect. And you want to make sure it's on all the ribs before you tighten anything up, otherwise it'll basically shred itself when you turn on the car for the first time. So let's put some tension on it. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. And the way to test the tension, because this is a manual tensioner, you want to take the longest stretch of belt. So here it's going to be between the alternator and the crank pulley, the longest stretch of flat belt with no pulleys. And you want to go in the middle and twist it. If you can twist it anywhere between 45 and 90 degrees, that's perfect. It should not be able to easily twist past 90, and it should not be able to easily twist below 45. So for me, it kind of wants to stop at 90, maybe a little bit past. So I'm going to snug it up just a little bit more, put a little more tension on it. Okay, let's see what that does. That feels just about perfect right there. If you can easily spin it past 90, it's too loose. And if you can, and if you can't spin it even 45 degrees, it's too tight, and you'll ruin your pulleys and your bearings. So you want to loosen it up. But this is perfect. So let's lock in the tension. Let's tighten this adjuster bolt in. Okay, I'll come back with my ratchet and manually tighten it. But now let's lock in the top one. That's with a 14mm socket. Okay, that's snug. Give it a little extra to tighten it up. Perfect, leave it there. Let's go on the bottom and manually check that bottom one. Oh yeah, that's nice and tight. Perfect. One last thing off of the old alternator is to remove this bracket and swap it over to the new one. So unbolt it with an 8mm socket. Okay, that's off. You can remove the bracket now. Now let's remove this nut on the new alternator. 8mm also. Okay, remove it all the way. Let's put the bracket on, slide it onto that stud, and then start the nut on to secure it. Okay. Make sure it's nice and tight. Of course, it's very small, so if you make it too tight, it'll just break. Okay, that's snug right there. And let's reattach this wiring harness to where it's supposed to be. Right there. Perfect. Put this fuse box back. Make sure it's secure. Now let's reconnect the battery. Grab your battery terminal. Start it on here. Make sure it's bottomed out completely so it makes nice, good contact. And then snug up the nut. Perfect. Now turn on the vehicle. Make sure you have no lights on the dash that aren't supposed to be there, and take it for a road test.